and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome to Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs with me, Jamie Franklin, and Tom Pelham. How's everyone doing today? Daniel?
Doing good, thank you, Jamie.
Very good. And Thomas, I mean, it's a little bit artificial, this, because we've just been making our bonus podcast for paying subscribers, Uncollared, which was a fantastic discussion of hymns and microaggressions. So I already know how you are, Tom, but you can just tell me anyway.
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, good.
It's bigging it up there. I mean, you know, as if there's some great thing to say. I'm good.
Great.
I had a bishop come to the deanery. It's our diocese's.
Okay, which bishop? Martin.
Well, I had Bishop Will.
Bishop Will. Okay, cool.
It's our diocese's year of faith. Diocesan year of faith. They're calling
year of
it.
Faith.
So, year of faith. Well, last year was
it every year a year of faith?
You might think, Jamie, but last year we had the year of the Old Testament.
Year of doubt.
Year of the New Testament. The year before that we had the year of the Old Testament.
Sounds this very Marcionite.
Well, it's like trying it out for a year, and then if the glove doesn't fit, you can do something else.
This is like a Hegelian dialectic that your diocese is involved in.
I think the
permanent existential crisis oscillating between extremes. Yeah, sorry.
I think the point of the Old Testament is that not many people preach on the Old Testament enough, and they wanted to encourage that. New Testament was because they needed something to fill the gap between Old Testament and the Year of Faith, Jamie, which is 950 years since Chichester was founded.
Okay, great.
And they moved the cathedral to Chichester from Selsey, as in Selsey Bill.
Nice.
And it is also, you'll be aware, 1700 years since the Council of Nicaea.
Yeah, 325. That was, yeah.
Yeah, so they're celebrating those two things in tandem.
Yeah,
which is quite nice. So we had the bishop we had a deanery celebration of the deanery's faith. Which is a bit odd because really the deanery is an administrative unit and not really a sort of anything else in a way. I mean, sorry.
The same is true of the diocese, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
The diocese is really a geographical area in actual terms. You know, if you look at the early church, it's not an administrative centre. It's a geographical area over which a bishop has spiritual jurisdiction, technically.
Yeah.
I hadn't realised till recently that it comes from the term from Diocletian, great persecuting emperor, who split the empire into dioceses.
Oh,
so the church using that term was, sort of paradoxical and ironical and whatnot.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, just speaking of things going on to do with Chichester, tomorrow I'm going to Canterbury Cathedral. Do you know why I'm going there, Tom? Do you have any idea?
You're going to go for a rave in the nave?
I'm not going for a rave in the nave. I'm going because Father Luke Capel-Irving is being.
Yes, he was the. We
prayed
for him. Prayed for him. He was coming from Archdeacon of Chichester. Yeah,
he's I don't know whether he's technically still is, but anyway, he's going to be ordained Bishop of Richborough tomorrow, and I'm going because he's going to be our new bishop. So I used to live in Canterbury, as did you, Daniel. I actually lived just outside the cathedral close. I haven't been back there for many years.
No, likewise.
Yeah, but I'm going to go, and it'll be interesting. So Tom sent us an email. He said he went to Canterbury Cathedral on Friday 21st, and he witnessed firsthand the clearance of the nave for a silent disco that same evening. So that was last week. And he sent me an image. I don't know whether you guys can see it on the Google Docs.
Incredible.
Yeah, so it's like it's a kind of DJ stage set. On the front is some foliage for some strange reason, and then a big rectangular sign, black and white sign with the word "incredible." Kind of weird, isn't it? I mean, and then obviously you've got the choir behind, place where Thomas à Becket was martyred, just off to the side. Yeah, it's pretty depressing. Hopefully they'll have moved that by tomorrow. Although the consecration is in the choir, so it might still be set up for a rave in the nave. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's...
No, do you know, I've never been to see a bishop be consecrated.
You don't?
No.
I've only been to one. I went to one in York for the new bishop of what was my bishop before? I forget. Beverley. Yeah, I went to York. It was very, very cold. It's very cold when you go up to the north. Have you found that? When you go up north, you get out of the train or the bus or whatever, and you're just freezing.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my goodness, how do people live in this environment?
It's not great.
Unbelievable. That's why they're so hardy, though, isn't it? Anyway, we should probably get on with the show, because people are probably wondering, if they've never listened to this before, what this is, and and rightly so, because we don't want to waste people's time here. Let's do a Bible reading, shall we? So should we just do Sunday's Bible reading? And we should have talked about this beforehand, but Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 36. The Transfiguration.
Yeah.
But we say the Lord's Prayer first. So just who should do that? Shall I do that? Daniel should do that. Okay, go on, Daniel.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen. Shall I read it? I've got it right. So Transfiguration. So this is Luke chapter 9, verse 28 to 36. It was interesting. The lectionary for the gospel reading this Sunday gives an option of going a little bit further and reading the bit about Jesus healing a boy with the unclean spirit as well. But I'm not going to read that. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now, Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. And as he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud, saying, This is my son, my chosen one, listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. That's the reading. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I'm preaching on the Transfiguration all the time. I mean, there's obviously the Feast of the Transfiguration
in August. It comes up quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, seems to come up all the time.
It comes, but usually, doesn't it come up in Lent as well? Quite often, if it doesn't come up here, it comes up in Lent.
It came up in the same place last year. I remember it was the Sunday before.
I think it's in the new liturgy. It's the Sunday before Lent that has the Transfiguration as an optional reading. I think if I've got this right, in the Roman liturgy, you can have this, or you can have a catechetical text. Yeah, there's a lot of Transfiguration.
But it's one of those things, isn't it, where, because I assume it's similar for you guys. I'm preaching like really quite regularly, and so when a text comes up that you've done quite recently, it's about finding some kind of angle into it, which is slightly different, or so you're not just repeating the same thing over and over again. We've kind of talked about this sometimes before. But anyway, the thing I wanted to pick up on here was this thing about them being heavy with sleep, and then becoming fully awake when they saw his glory. So that's what I'm going to preach on this week. I thought about that as a kind of image of spiritual sleepiness, the kind of need for us to wake up to the glory of God, to stop being hypnotized by, social media and mobile phones, and to a certain extent, just the commonplace addictions of life, or the things that we rely on for sustenance and support. So I'm going to talk a bit about Lent as well. This is part of the reason why we fast during Lent, because we remove some of those things that we rely upon for emotional or psychological support, and instead we use that energy and that sense of need to come to God in prayer. So I'm kind of using that image of them being asleep and then waking up to talk about waking up spiritually and using the disciplines that come to us in Lent to do that. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about in Lent. Have you guys thought about this passage at all?
Yeah, I'm picking up from last week, where we had the narrative of Jesus calming the storm, and they were astonished, amazed, terrified. So we explored last week the fear of the Lord at the beginning of all wisdom. That good fear, that sort of Aslan is not a safe lion, but he's good.
Yeah.
And that it is those is those epiphanies, revelations that are over 2 millennia, where the saints have gone into that and realized what that fear is, and have been emboldened and transformed through that. And that, we can't be shy as congregations to not talk about this, particularly in an age where a lot of people are spiritually awakening. And we need to have, we can't be too, inverted commas, Anglican about it, in the, in the worst sense of the word, of we're going to be buttoned up. And so I was going to pick up on the cloud. While they were saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. I think it's that good fear, isn't it? It's that it's not a Lord, it's not a panic-stricken anxiety. I think it's more a sense of the awesomeness. A bit like if you walk into the ocean, you realize that as a swimmer, you've got to respect the ocean. And I think you come to a point in life as a swimmer where you begin to realize this thing is marvelous but dangerous.
It's like the concept in Romanticism of the sublime. You have this kind of sense of overwhelming awe at the power of nature, and there's a sort of fear there as well, because you recognize that you're so small in comparison to it. I've never been to the Grand Canyon, but I hear that that's kind of what happens when people go to the Grand Canyon. They sort of feel this sense of being overwhelmed by its awesomeness and by its power.
And I think I also pick up from the Transfiguration that in contemplative practice, that the voice doesn't come, or it's unusual for the voice to come until we are acclimatized to that. The people who say, "Oh, well, I'd believe in God if I heard a voice," as if God would necessarily dial them up and just tell them that he exists. Because that's generally what I think a lot of people want. Well, if he exists, why doesn't he just present himself to me? Or, give me a phone or speak to me? If I heard a voice then.
I think, I always think that the story of Lazarus and Abraham is a reasonable riposte to that sort of thing, because, I think the people who say to me, come and, show me, do some sort of miracle, I say to them, you know what? Even if a miracle happened in front of you, you would doubt it. You would deny it, because you haven't opened your heart. The hardness of your heart is such that, God can't speak to you. Or even if he did, you'd think it was something else. You'd think it was some sort of illusion or something, if you haven't listened to the prophets, then you won't listen to Lazarus coming back to life again. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So ethics comes from before epistemology in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you hear this a lot from folks who also say, "Well, I'd come to church if the church met my, say, moral shopping lists, then I'd come. But I don't come because I'm upset." And you think, well, actually, you don't come because A, you can't get out of bed, and B, because you haven't had that motivating experience. You're talking about God in the abstract, as if Christianity is a series of moral precepts rather than an encounter with the living God. And if you met him, you'd fashion your life against that. Do you remember a friend of the show, Bethel McGrew?
She's been in London recently. She came to the art concert.
She interviewed Douglas Murray a few years ago and pushed him on this. And he came up with this, very sweetly said, "Well, if I heard a voice, I think that would perhaps do it for me." And then she said, "Well, I'm not so sure. What if the voice told you something you didn't like?"
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, and that's also something I'd pick up on. I think in some ways you're being slightly kind to people who, say they'd like to come to church, but they won't for particular reasons. I think most of the time people don't want to come to church because they don't want to think about the idea of God, and that's because God, for exactly the reason you've just said, God might say to them, you've got to change your life in some way. With Douglas Murray, it's kind of obvious what God might say in that circumstance, but it's true of everyone who just these kind of people, where I live, and I'm certain it's similar in way, middle class places in the south of England, like you two live in as well. People just, they've got their material comforts, they've got their career, they've got their 2.4 children or whatever, probably less than that nowadays, and they don't want to think about somebody else having some kind of say in the way that they run their lives. And I think, like, as a priest, you see this quite a lot. I don't know how you find this, but when I'm walking around my clericals, a lot of the time people just don't want to even engage with you or meet your eye. And it might be because I wear a cassock and they think I look really weird, but I think it's also just because they don't want to think about what you represent. I don't know whether you've had that experience yourselves.
Well, I think I always think that
they think you've been in a crash, obviously, Tom, because of your wraparound collar, which looks like a neck brace. But sorry,
they know who I am, Jamie. They know who I am.
They know me.
They know. They do. It's a village.
I'm sure they do know you. You're probably a very well-known character.
I think the key always is that people who say to me, I'd like to come to church, but I can't find, or bars is not, but we've got a lot on. They're making a choice, aren't they?
Yeah.
They always are. This, and in the end, I can't make that choice for them. I can say, if you'd like to come to church, then here it is, and I'll try and make it as convenient as possible. But I'm not chasing you around. Either surrender to God or don't. You've got a choice. I mean, I'm not usually quite that blunt. Sometimes I am.
Now, would you like a scone?
Here, a scone. The scone of consolation. Yeah.
Funds at £1.50.
I often
to buy a jam jar.
Yeah.
Do you think this also speaks in the gospel story that Christ takes Peter, James, and John? He doesn't take the whole 12. That this is that this is a particular truth that only at that point there was just a few of them were ready for it, but the rest weren't. They're left at the foothills, presumably.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Jesus seems to have a strategy, doesn't he, of choosing like circles within circles.
Well, that's a great discipleship thing, and I was a bit grumpy the other day because my Christianity Explored course I'm running in Lent has only got 3 people on it, and then I realised that actually that's if they come, that's incredibly close time with 3 people who they're not churchgoers.
That's good. You shouldn't be discouraged about that.
I might change the course slightly, and I've delayed the start because one of them couldn't make the first one. I went 3 down to 2. That's probably a bit too much, but actually Christianity Explored, because it's a discussion group, is kind of paced for sort of groups of 10 or so, and if you've got fewer numbers, then you rattle through it anyway. So I thought I can do that, but Jesus definitely goes away with 3 or 4 quite regularly. To disciple them personally, to give them what they need to know. Peter, John, and James, the 3 great leaders of the early church.
It's funny. I saw a thing in the gym notice board yesterday where one of these.
You've been lifting, Daniel. You're a lifting bro now.
Pumping iron.
Getting my middle puniverse body.
Getting the pump. Yeah, nice.
Well, both my kids are going now, so I felt
nice.
Into it. And my son, 19, he's one of these kids who's eating all the protein shakes and stuff, and he's really sort of bulking up, doing lots of rugby. My daughter's sort of catching up really in terms of fitness with him. But so I thought it was time that I sort of dragged my middle-aged body to there. But there was this post of one of these sort of, men gather, come and climb a mountain with such and such guru from Totnes, we'll
nice.
And then we'll have ice baths and
right, cool, like Wim Hof
stuff. But it's kind of
it's kind of I'm not sure about bathing with my parishioners. I think that's probably a safeguarding nightmare. But, I'll give the DSA. What do you think about me having baths with my parishioners?
I forgot what I was going to say now.
Something about the guru who was like,
the mountain. Well, that's interesting. That's being offered. That there's clearly in the Transfiguration story, they climbed up a mountain. That there is a physicalness to that as well that can easily be lost. That is obvious. That would have maybe been days, weeks of preparation, and then the climb. That there's hardly likely to be a sort of Galilee tuck shop or co-op spa halfway up.
To be fair, it's only 8 days after the sermon on the plain, but yes, you're.
There's a kind of physicalness to
there is though,
that it begins with again, and I think that's something as we enter Lent that again, what a lot of mainstream churches were not very good at. That side of the spiritual life, which I think particularly as we're seeing a lot of chaps who are leaning into Christianity afresh. I think if that isn't part and parcel of the package, really, returning to those kind of holy habits, then I think we're not going to really connect as much as we could do. And I was just intrigued that clearly from this poster where you could take he'd left phone numbers that you could peel off, that they're pretty much all gone.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've often commented on this thing about the church needing to ask more of people and not less. And I think that's Lent is one of those times, isn't it, where you sort of feel worried that people will be turned off by this idea. But actually, in our culture today, there are loads of people who are massively into self-help, self-improvement, denying themselves in certain ways, cultivating self-discipline. And so Lent's a great time in that sense to sort of challenge people and say that, if you want to take things to the next level, then the church has got things.
I always think of
2,000 years.
I often refer to kind of love and kind of the Christian life as a muscle that needs to be exercised. Otherwise, you won't ever lift, as much as you could. I mean,
don't call it a love muscle though.
Love muscle
might be
the love muscle.
Safeguarding.
That's another safeguarding issue.
But it's like a muscle. It's a simile, Jamie.
I know. I'm just saying.
We need a safeguarding buzzer or jingle.
Every
time something like this comes up.
I often say that the Christian life is like a love muscle. Sorry.
Don't mind Jamie to edit that bit out.
I'll leave it in. We've got nothing to hide.
We've got nothing to hide.
I mean, not. Sorry, John.
Comment.
I don't mean like that.
When I preach this passage, I think part of it is about not sort of. There's a sort of desire to. I always think of the building of the huts as a kind of a sort of psychological desire to kind of seal away this revelation because it's too much. And we're very good at doing peripheral things as a church that don't really get to the heart of the matter. And I often I think all the stuff that takes our time up, the building regulations, the eco insanity, all of that stuff that they're enforcing on us. It's just noise. And
no, but we love it, isn't it? There's sort of comfort food to it.
Yeah,
this is something we can do, and can be achieved. And you can get this in PCC meetings where you might open up with a spiritual, and then 10 minutes in, you start talking about drains, and you can see people, the relief, we're actually talking about something that we can do.
Yes,
and that's a shame, I think, because the spiritual should be a natural part of our skill set.
Yeah. Chaps, we're going to have to move on because we need to leave plenty of time for our stories today. But that's a good discussion. And we've drawn several things out of that text there, which I hope is helpful for people. So what should we do? I think firstly we should listen to this clip by J. John because I found this really funny. I don't know have you seen this?
Who's J. John?
Do you not know who J. John is, really?
I don't know who J. John is.
Do you remember Benjamin John, who we did that event with?
Oh, yes.
I mean, he's his son, but that's not normally what J. John is known for, being the father of Benjamin John. He's like probably the most sort of famous living British evangelist, I'd say.
Okay, fair enough.
So finger on the pulse as always, Tom. Anyway, this is a clip I thought was funny. Here we go.
I'm very touched that so many people have written to me recommending me to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, that will never happen, and I'm not sure it would be wise for me to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. If I was the next Archbishop, I would ask every bishop and every clergy the following questions. Question 1. Do you believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life? Question 2. Do you believe the Bible is the Word of God? Question 3. Do you love Jesus? Question 4. Do you like people? Question 5. Do you like introducing people to Jesus? And if the bishop, the clergy, could not say yes to all those questions, I would sack them on my first day in Lambeth Palace. So I'd basically blow up the whole of the Church of England. So I'm not sure I would be the right person.
So I'm just nominating him now.
That's the guy who should be the Archbishop of Canterbury, isn't it?
I went to a preaching workshop with him at Aberdeen.
Right.
And I have to say, it was incredible, actually. Yeah. We were, Episcopalians and Presbyterians, high and low. And he was fantastically engaging. He had some extraordinary stories and insights and recommendations. And we all had a little go at, a 2-minute speechette, to which he made some comments at, and we prayed with him, he prayed with us, and he doesn't come necessarily from my tradition, but whatever that means. But I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very serious point there, and we've often talked about this, which is like whoever the Archbishop of Canterbury is needs to give clear direction to the church. This way of, which as much as I have respect for him, Rowan Williams was also of this approach. I mean, Justin Welby was as well, but in a different way. It's just about trying to keep people at the table, and I just don't think that that's what leadership is about in this context. It's about giving clear direction. This is who we are as a church. This is what we believe, and I think he's exactly right. If you're a priest or a bishop in the church, you have to teach the church's doctrine. You cannot be,
and you have to, if you want to teach it as well. I mean, was it? It was the synod speech by Charlie Bell.
Oh yeah,
and he did a few.
He's always doing
something. And he did one. He said, as a professional psychologist, it's disastrous. Or it should be considered to be improper to. He was talking about sort of use play to teach Christianity, and I was sitting there thinking, I use everything I can to teach Christianity because I think it's true.
Use what to teach Christianity?
Play. He was having a go at messy play, I think, and the idea messy church, messy play particularly, or holy play, or whatever it's called.
Okay.
The idea that you.
Appropriate.
Well, he said it's not appropriate because it's it's deceiving people into believing Christ, and I'm thinking, but if you don't, with everything you do, teach Christ, then something else moves in. It doesn't really matter what your intentions are; something else will move in, and that won't be Christ.
Yeah. Well, I think the less said about that particular person, the better. To be honest with you.
Well.
So anyway, J. John for next Archbishop, he'd be good pick in my opinion. What was his first question there? I was just trying to remember them. So the second one was about the Bible. The third one's about loving Jesus. Fourth,
do you believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life?
Okay, all right. So yes, I think I answer yes to all of those questions. So I wouldn't get fired by him.
Well, you're not a bishop. You're not a bishop though. So
no, but he said all clergy. He said all clergy. I mean, he technically wouldn't really be able to do that if he was the Archbishop, but he could certainly get up and suggest that people who
don't believe the doctrine of the church
say yes to all those questions. I mean, my set of questions would be slightly different, but the idea would be the same. I'd say, do you believe in what it says in our formularies? And if you don't, why do you want to be a clergyman in the Church of England? That's what I'd say.
I suppose the pushback on that, though I agree with you, Jamie, some might say, well, that those formularies you could still dance around and not really, to an extent. Well, Jesus was risen in the hearts of the disciples.
Yeah, it's not really.
You know what I mean?
No. Yeah, I know, of course, but I think it needs to be established that that's what the conversation's about.
Or they're only railing against the papist of that time's version of purgatory. Yes, yes.
The thing about it is, Tom, it's like, I mean, even though we have these debates about that, we're debating about the same thing, aren't we? That's the point. It's like we're having an argument about what the 39 Articles actually say, but the conversation is about the 39 Articles. We acknowledge that they should be some kind of authority.
Yeah,
Many people we know who are priests now, or who we trained with, have just got no interest in the 39 Articles.
They don't even know what they are, Jamie. They literally don't know what they are.
Yeah, well, there was another debate on Twitter, wasn't it, this week about Anglicanism? Did you see that? And
it was about training
Anglicanism not being taught in theological
colleges. I did a tweet about that. It got quite a lot of retweets, actually. Yeah. But I was saying that, like, basically what we taught about Anglicanism in training college, like we were taught to use morning and evening prayer from common worship, which I already knew. We were taught, that the Book of Common Prayer and the 39 Articles were kind of in irrelevance because we no longer have to, say that they are. Well, the oath has been changed, hasn't it? Basically, the oath that we take, our sort of canonical oath in that sense. So now we have to just say that they have witnessed to Christian truth or something like that, rather than saying the truth.
Strictly speaking, though, you still have the canon. So canon A2, which says the 39 Articles in the order may be assented with a good conscience by all.
Yeah, I'm not saying. Yeah, I'm not saying that that's not true. What I'm just saying what we were taught about Anglicanism in theological college. We weren't taught about Richard Hooker or Lancelot Andrews, or even
if you were taught about Richard Hooker, it would be about the three-legged stool that he never talked about, was the antithesis of what he actually said and taught. Because but it's still there. People still teach this as if it's true. Really annoys me.
I had a friend who did a PhD on exactly that to prove exactly the point you've just made.
It's Richard Hooker's 3-step solution to biblical truth: first Scripture, then reason, then tradition. But the Scripture is the foundation of it all, and the first point of call. It's not like a stool that becomes shaky if we shorten one of the legs. No. Well, I've heard that sort of pronounced, and even by quite academically minded priests. It's like you've clearly never read Hooker, have you? You've only read liberal kind of distillations of Hooker that haven't understood what he was saying in the laws of ecclesiastical polity. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. So what should we talk about? Should we talk about General Synod? Should we talk about the nomination for the Bishop of Durham being withdrawn? Should we talk about Trump? Or should we
Let's start with Trump, because it's it's an interesting one. And so Trump has signed an IVF order, doesn't he?
So expanding access to IVF and reducing its costs.
And you might think, oh well, why on earth are Reverend worrying about that? Because isn't IVF a good thing? Isn't it good to have children? The problem is, and the big issue with IVF is that, for me at least, that it requires the destruction of embryos. So you make more embryos than are necessary, and only implant some of them. So you're making some life but sacrificing other life in order to make it, which of course we can't. There's a real issue with that.
I mean that's basically. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not like massively across like these kind of biomedical issues, in terms of their sort of subtleties. But that's the kind of my basic kind of starter for 10 on this. Is that it involves creating embryos. The embryos are then used to try.
Some of them are.
Yeah, exactly. So some of them are, and then many of them are discarded and destroyed. So that would sort of seem to not be good, because it's the destruction of life, isn't it?
And presumably on the back of that, you could have it opens up the possibilities of more surrogacy. Of a kind of egg donation could just go off the scale.
Well, that's the other issue here. I mean, it's one of the other issues, is that it turns the process of childbirth into like an economic transaction. It commodifies it. And so, as you say quite rightly, Daniel, then all these kind of other implications follow from it as well. It removes, I suppose, one of the fundamental things that it does is it removes the act of procreation from marriage. From a one man, one woman in a covenantal union having a child. Now, of course, that can happen via IVF.
So I've just asked Grok, and there's a couple of, there are some subtleties here, I think. Daniel's wandered off.
Grok is so good, isn't it? I
love
good. Grok.
So I had read about a number of things. One of them being you can in some clinics only fertilize the number of embryos that you're going to implant.
I've heard of people. I've heard of Christians doing that,
and that does satisfy some of the problems. But the issue about, I think that there should be a definite red line about using it from a Christian perspective, using it outside of marriage or with people who are not within that marriage. So, for example, if you had a sperm donor because the man was infertile or something, that's obvious. It's essentially infidelity, isn't it? Yeah. It's not that. It's not the product of that marriage. It's the product of a separate partnership, which is not.
So, what do you think then? Because I think I know what I think. But if you could just use the embryos that were created and not destroy any.
Yeah.
Do you think that should be
if you could just use if you just use the embryos that you create, you don't destroy any, and you are doing it within the relation within the context of marriage, then I think most of my ethical problems with it have gone.
Yeah. I mean, do you think there's something problematic about turning the act of procreation into something that happens in a laboratory rather than via the act of marriage, as it's called?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes and no. I guess that all of our modern medicine is turning a natural process into something that's sort of medically driven, isn't it? I mean, you could
give an example that's analogous to.
Well, you could follow that down. Like, hasn't God given us, the ability to heal from cuts? So why bother? We don't bother stitching them up and sterilizing them.
I think there's something sort of fundamentally different though. When it's a holistic thing, isn't it? So you're united, man and wife are united in covenantal union before God, and then the sexual act is the kind of consummation of that covenantal union, and as a result of the sexual act, children may come and frequently do. Depending on whether you're fertile or not, and so on. And so it's all of a piece. It's a kind of holistic thing that all works together naturally, covenantally, spiritually. And I'm just saying it does seem to be quite different to then, if that doesn't happen for whatever reason, to then create a child using laboratory equipment. Just
I guess like I wouldn't want to make like a strong kind of fundamental ruling about that. I think everyone would have to approach it with prayer and discernment. Like as long as we that there aren't any kind of destruction of embryos, and that the couple who you're doing it with are in a marriage before God, then anything else would have to. I'd struggle to like make a definitive moral reading about that. I think they'd have to approach it with prayer and guidance. But I don't see in the Bible a direct kind of command against it, if you see what I mean. In the same way that I see from the Bible, I can see a direct command against infidelity.
I don't know. I think that kind of argument is slightly dodgy argument though, because there are lots of things that the Bible doesn't necessarily explicitly contradict or explicitly say are forbidden, which we would say are forbidden. I mean, this is a technological issue that was not relevant at the time.
Yeah, okay, but for example, abortion. You might quite rightly say that abortion isn't directly dealt with in the Bible, but there's a command against murder, and there's obvious implications in the Psalms that God knows us before we leave our mother's womb. So therefore we can pace hooker draw a first line sort of derivative reasoning and say abortion is forbidden by the Bible because the Bible both suggests that we're loved by God and created beings before we're born, and it says that killing is murder. The killing is sinful. So, that's exactly what Hooke is talking about when he's saying reason. That's a first order kind of reasoning, right? Because it's not directly in the Bible, but it's first order.
I know that. That doesn't. I don't think. So
no, I'm explaining. I know you know it. I'm explaining it to our listeners. But then I'm not convinced that it's quite such an obvious first order kind of reasoning to say that the Bible, that just because sexual intercourse is the consummation of a holy marriage, and the product of children is a blessing of sexual intercourse, that just because you take the take it into a laboratory and help the natural process happen there rather than inside a womb, there's a sin going on. I think I'd be really careful about that.
I mean, I hope they am being careful, but the longer we talk about it, the more I'm thinking it actually is really problematic. I mean, if you think about what it says in the Book of Common Prayer about the purposes of marriage. I mean, it's specifically to preclude fornication, to provide comfort and friendship, and for the procreation of children. Sorry. So I mean, it's specifically spoken about in our formularies that this is the purpose of marriage, and it's specifically talking there about the sexual act, right? So if you're gonna then maybe. I don't know. I'd have to think.
You could reason it the other way around and say that this is, done within the moral frameworks that we've outlined. This is a aid to the purposes of marriage, and therefore a godly thing.
I think they argued that in the 1933 Lambeth Conference, because I think back then contraception was seen as an aid to the marital life. Naively, by the time of the Second World War, condoms were being given out left, right, and centre because they were then seen as a way of stopping, sexual disease and unwanted pregnancies and what have you. Most forms, I think, of artificial, but I think both conception and contraception are now seen as, marriage is seen as incidental to an industry rather than in the center of it. Yeah. So we've created this kind of technocratic tower of goods that people can access, irrespective of their lifestyle. Whereas I think we began with this idea that it would just be a way, to enhance family life, and how naive we were.
I think the other thing, I mean, that's a really good point. The other thing that occurs to me as you're speaking there, Daniel, and also as you talk about the surrogacy thing, is even if you were, you might not have heard it because you were dealing with something, but we were talking about what if you could do this without destroying any embryos? Would this be okay from a Christian perspective? But another thing about this is it puts you in at least in an adjacent position to practices that we wouldn't be comfortable with, so the destruction of embryos, for example, and surrogacy and all of these sorts of things. It sort of reminds me of, when we had the debate about the COVID vaccines and the way that they were developed using, I forget the exact scientific kind of way of talking about it now, but essentially using
they used human cells from a number of different, including embryos, and also cells from some cancer patients that had been harvested and were being grown. So
it was aborted fetuses, wasn't it? Essentially. So at the very least, what you're doing is, because the Roman Church made this argument that that this was licit for various different reasons. It was sort of it was a sort of historic lineage, and the overall good was sort of outweighs the bad and so on. But you're putting yourself in a position where you're, at the very least, you're participating in an industry which is doing these things still, and which you wouldn't necessarily want to support. Maybe that's not the strongest argument, because you could
you could say we could legislate it, couldn't you? We could if we really wanted to, we could say much like contraception should be. Put them on prescription from the doctor for married couples to use, and don't use them anywhere else. That was the kind of idea originally, or IVF. Again on prescription from the doctor for married couples who under the condition that they don't destroy any embryos.
The same argument for both credit and mortgages. You had to be in a stable marriage. You couldn't go to your bank manager and say, well, I want a mortgage and I'm living with my girlfriend and maybe one day we'll get married. 60 years ago, they'd have chucked you out the office back into the high street because you had to demonstrate a stability of life.
Yeah. So let's talk about the political thing just for a minute. So it's interesting that Trump is doing this. So some people are suggesting that the reason he's doing it is to counter the narrative that he's threatening people's reproductive rights through the position that he has on the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which is essentially that the states should be sorting this out. This shouldn't be a federal issue. Abortion law shouldn't be a federal issue, essentially. So there's that. But then the seeming downside of it, as far as Trump's base is concerned, and also for us looking at it from our perspective as Christians in the UK, or Britain, or England, whatever we want to call it nowadays, is that he is supporting a policy which more conservatively minded Christians people and Christians may not like and may be very unpopular. And quite frankly, it's not something that I like. But yeah, so it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean,
he may also be being pushed from Elon Musk, who's very pro-natal.
Musk has a surrogate child, doesn't he? I think
this sense of a population implosion.
Yeah. Okay.
America, like every other Western country, bar I think Hungary, needs to massively increase its birth rates.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So he's doing it because he's trying to get
doing it via popsicle embryos.
Yeah. Does Musk have a surrogate child? I just want to look this up. He
has all sorts of children, doesn't he? He has a transgender child. He has a new child from some other random social media influencer.
Yeah. Apparently he's more than one. So he has one with his former partner, a daughter named Exodark Sidereal Musk, with one of those funny A-E things, where the A and the E together. Additionally, their third child, a son named Techno Mechanicus.
I mean, he's a deeply strange, and I always think we should be.
Yes, Techno Mechanicus.
Come here, Texo.
Come here.
Techno Mechanicus was born via surrogacy. It's a good name for a child born via surrogacy.
Did you wash your hands for dinner, Techno Mechanicus?
Techno. Musk has a total of 12 known living children, several of whom were conceived through assisted reproductive technologies, including
13 now. You're out of date.
Well, I've just asked Grok.
Yeah, well, Grok just told me 13.
Why?
With Ashley Sinclair, it's alleged and unconfirmed by Musk.
Oh, okay, I remember that. Yeah, okay. So, yeah. But yeah, so basically he's a big fan of natalism and using technology in order to produce children, which is hardly surprising.
Well, he lost his first child, didn't he?
How was that?
So Nevada, Alexander Musk died of SIDS at 10 weeks old. Yeah.
Oh.
So that might influence some things here.
That's terrible, isn't it? That's really bad. Techno Mechanicus. He hasn't lost his sense of humor. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm slightly disappointed with Trump there, but I think the fact is, we know he's not really a Christian in that sense, and so he's not going to be doing everything that Christians like all the time, as much as we might be supportive of him in other ways. Okay, so let's talk about some other things, shall we? So, like other political things, I found this thing about. So this is an article in the BBC. MND sufferer backs amendment to assisted dying bill. And this is just something that we've talked about a number of times already. a father with motor neurons disease has urged MPs to press ahead with changes to the law on assisted dying. So a law which hasn't been passed yet. A committee of MPs is expected to consider amendments to the terminally ill adults end of life bill in the coming weeks. And then he said, Liberal Democrat MP Tom Gordon has proposed an amendment to the bill which would allow people with neurodegenerative diseases such as MND to request assisted dying when they're estimated to have 12 months left to live. The change would extend the eligibility for people with neurodegenerative illnesses to a year from the current proposed 6 months. Mr. Newby said the change would be a very wise and sensible thing to put into law. The neurological diseases come with a very high risk of a cognitive decline in the later stages. I mean, the thing that's...
So does life.
Well, yeah. So does, like, having children. I mean, you never sleep. And you constantly have noise in your mind. Sorry. Yeah, so what did Kim Leadbeater say about, this 6 month, sort of iron ring of surety that this would...
Well, she just lies, doesn't she? She just lies. I mean, she's been lying about the Supreme Court judge, and then suddenly changed her mind, didn't she?
Right.
It's sort of car crash. I mean, I think this actually has been so bad that I'm hoping a sufficient number of MPs switch back again, because they were all assured there'd be a robust kind of committee stage. It's obviously not been, and they've not taken any advice, and they're just making it worse and worse. So the whole thing is just disastrous, and I really hope that the MPs come back to their senses.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that it's all the proposed bill has also changed in terms of the need it would have for a judge to sign?
Yeah, it's gone. It's gone.
That's gone.
It's now social workers or something.
I mean, because there was someone last year, a nurse practitioner, midwife, I think, not midwife, matron, who went on the air to say what will happen is that dozens of these will be signed in the morning as staff are having breakfast.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like the abortion.
Then they'll work out in what lunch break are they going to administer these.
Isn't it? Very good.
It'll get doctors will pre-sign letters, because this is the sort of thing that happens with all admin, is that there are huge in trays and a consultant doctor registrar will just take a pile and just sign them, a whole bunch of these through, push them out of one in tray into somebody else's.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what's going to happen. So I just looked this up, right? So supporters like Leadbeater, is it Leadbeater or better?
Leadbetter, I think.
Leadbetter. Beater sounds better, doesn't it?
Leadbeater. She's got dead eyes.
She really does. Defend the limit as a clear conservative boundary to ensure the law applies only to those in the final stages of terminal illnesses, avoiding broader applications seen in places like the Netherlands where unbearable suffering without a time limit qualifies. They point to Oregon's similar 6 month model in place since 1997, which hasn't expanded beyond its original scope, suggesting it's a workable safeguard. The bill's backers also argue it balances choice for the dying with protections against abuse, though Leadbeater has resisted expanding it to 12 months, prioritising a tight framework. If the House chooses to pass the bill, this is a quote from her, those criteria cannot be changed. They are set. But there will be a committee stage, and I will welcome amendments and suggestions to strengthen it further. The 6 month limit is based on models like Oregon's, which has operated successfully since 1997, blah, blah, blah. I've been clear that this is for people with 6 months or less to live, and I won't extend supporting it to 12 months or beyond. This isn't about chronic conditions or suffering with a terminal diagnosis. It's about a specific narrow group. But the bill isn't even passed yet, and we're already talking about changing it to 12 months. So this whole thing, it just shows you how just completely arbitrary the whole thing is. You can say, oh, well, it hasn't expanded in Oregon, but it's an ironclad logical argument. If people who have 6 months to live, who are suffering terribly, and they are definitely going to die, barring some kind of miracle, are eligible for this, then why should somebody who's only got who's got 9 months to live or a year to live. There's no, it's completely arbitrary. That's the whole point. There's no logical reason. And it's obviously, there is a logical reason to expand it.
Yeah.
If you accept the premises.
And and they'll keep trying, won't they? They'll just keep. I mean, the idea that it's sort of set in stone and can't be changed again. No, that's not how Parliament works. They all seem to be very confused about this actually in MPs, and I'm just not concerned. I'm concerned that we're not being run by the brightest people in the world who understand the political system we work in. Because Ed Miliband, saying I'm going to ban fracking forever.
Ed Miliband, honestly,
you can literally ban fracking for as long as this Parliament, as long as this Parliament wants to. I mean, the next Parliament, or even indeed this Parliament, could undo it, because Parliament is sovereign, not Ed Miliband's wishes. And then you got Kim Ledbetter, who doesn't even understand the same thing. That if they wanted to, they could push this out wider. It's not like set in stone. That Parliament cannot bind its successors. It's a well-established piece of constitutional law.
It really winds me up when Keir Starmer says "my government." Yeah, and it's not his government; it's the King's government. It's our government, and that to me betrays a certain authoritarian streak, really. That I think you're talking into, Tom.
Can I tell you guys something I heard this week? It was a really good interview with Liz Truss. Actually, I mean, I was as surprised as anyone on Andrew Gold. But it was, I'd encourage people to check it out. But one of the things she said, which is absolutely unbelievable, I say this because of the Ed Miliband thing. Apparently, so there are a couple of things, right? So America fracks, obviously, we all know this, gets the liquid natural gas. I think she said they freeze it and then they ship it over here and we unfreeze it and use it and buy it from them. And the second one was even worse, which is that China are building 1 to 2 coal-fired power stations a week, literally a week, 1 to 2 a week, so 50 to 100 a year. And what they do is they use the energy that they produce in those coal-fired power stations to create solar panels, and then they sell those solar panels to us so that we can create solar energy. It's clean solar energy. And
do you know what? Everything's stupid. Like we could frack. We could frack and get 10 years worth of UK gas from the ground underneath the Middle East, the East Midlands and the Mid East Midlands. The
Middle East. We could
the Middle East and the Midlands. We could frack 10 years worth of gas out of there, and it would be cleaner and cheaper than importing, because
and it would give loads of people jobs as well.
And when you import it, you lose some in the process of liquefying and then deliquefying the natural gas. You obviously have the emissions of the boats. You have the and then of course the emissions of creating it are elsewhere, so they still count, don't they? It's still our oil. So you could just do it, and we'd be cleaner. We'd use less carbon. If you're really interested in that, we'd get lots of jobs and lots of money, and our bills would decrease rapidly. Because Miliband keeps claiming that it's international oil prices drive our things. It's not international oil prices. Our bills are expensive because we rely on the international markets for them.
Yeah, because we didn't have to buy some oil from the international market, we wouldn't spend so much money, would we?
It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking how expensive our energy is compared to America. Yeah. So I was reading about we're talking about Stoke-on-Trent. I think in
your homeland.
Uncommon,
your ancestral
homeland of Stoke-on-Trent, and all of those potteries are closing down because our energy per kilowatt hour is, I think, something like 4 times as much as the USA. So you just can't compete. It's double the price even of Europe. We've got the most expensive energy in the world, industrial energy, and so not only would it give us direct, jobs from processing and extracting the oil from the Midlands, and bring wealth to an area which is quite actually post-industrial in some areas, it would also enable us to have cheaper industry and start competing, which is on our, and then we would get wealthy again, which we haven't been for many years, and we would be able to build nuclear power stations, for example. You
know what the other thing Liz Truss said. I've become quite a Liz Truss fan actually listening to this. Is that we are poorer in Britain than the poorest state in the US, which is Mississippi. Yes. So if we were one of the 51 states of the US, we would be at the bottom of the list.
Yeah, absolutely.
London skews
everything else.
The whole picture, doesn't it?
It does.
And then you've got this. Ed Miliband. But you just have to look at his face to see that he's a religious fanatic. his kind of wide eyes. He's just, he's an ideologically driven religious fanaticist is what he is. And he's driving the country into poverty. And, I'm just going to go on a bit of a rant here. I had a backwards and forwards on X, as it is called, with, what's the name of that guy? Krish Kandiah, who was grandstanding about, right-wing. He was saying, why are there all these right-wing Christians? Why are there all these right-wing Christians who want to destroy the natural environment and who don't want to welcome the stranger and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things I said to him was, you're assuming that net zero or something like it is just the obviously Christian position. Whereas what you're actually saying is fraught with all kinds of political and epistemological and scientific and moral assumptions. And, the only thing he really said to me, I say it was a back and forth. I mean, he didn't really respond to me very much. But, he just said, well, the case for climate change is clear. I just think, well, firstly, no, it's not. And secondly, even if it is, even if we agree on the empirical facts, that doesn't mean that there are obvious political solutions which necessarily follow. I mean, is it a moral thing, for example? Is it a Christian thing to drive the population of your country into poverty because you are pursuing some kind of ideological goal of reducing carbon emissions? Is that a Christian thing to do? Is it a Christian thing to do to deprive old people of fuel for their houses so they can't heat their houses and they get colder and they're more likely to die in the winter months? Is it a Christian thing to do to drive up energy prices so working class, single parent families in the north can't afford to live, can't afford to feed their children? It really annoys me, like this metropolitan grandstanding that these people, these Christians come out with. It's so short-sighted, and it's so elitist and out of touch with how people actually live in this country outside of London. It really annoys the hell out of me, I have to say. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant. I knew that was coming. It was bubbling up deep within me.
Yeah, and I think it gets traction because a lot of the mainstream churches are now very corporate. Certainly the Church of England is since Welby. And so that there is a deep desire within the corporate psyche to present itself as, being on the moral high ground, being with it, being on side, and doing so at the expense of other voices. Yeah. And because I think that, the climate change thing is the one issue that supposedly, well, it's uncontentious, like buying mosquito nets for Africa. So in synods and deaneries, it's the thing we can all kind of nod through in the post lunch break and think, oh, well, at least we agreed on one thing, and it gets pushed into that box. And so if you try and push back on it, I think I did once at a diocesan synod, and it was as if I dissented on the Nicene Creed. The looks...
Weirdly, that'd probably go down better, Daniel, exactly. On the whole,
If he said, I'm not sure about this whole...
I'm not sure about the virgin birth,
hold that intention. But net zero by 2030, I'm not so sure, Bishop.
Get the faggots
his mitre fell off, yeah.
And I'm sure I heard someone in the room say, he's a denier.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, they start whispering about you.
Far right microaggressions, don't you? That was brave.
Yeah, that was a brave thing to say. I didn't realize you were far right, Daniel. I didn't realize you were a far right denier.
Yeah, and your English is very good, Daniel. Your English is very good.
Is excellent.
Excellent English.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about? We've got a few more minutes to talk about General Synod, which I know you're all really excited about.
Has it met?
I mean, why would we? Yeah, apparently there has actually been a General Synod. I mean, we spoke about microaggressions. So the Bishop of London started crying at one point because of microaggressions. We discussed that actually on our Uncollared podcast. So we won't talk about that now. If you want to listen to that, please go to irreverendpod.com and click on the red button and become a Patreon. And then you can listen to our bonus podcast, Uncollared, which is a really good podcast. It was about 40 minutes long this week. We went into a huge amount of detail about microaggressions and what they are, their causes, the various microaggressions that we are guilty of.
Jamie microaggressed me. He did.
I do it all the time. I mean, you do as well against me.
Yeah, and you're
way
constantly
worse.
using your qualifications against
me. Yes, and
constantly mentioning my book. Yeah.
Book, yeah.
Yeah, I am. That's true. That's a massive microaggression. It's a major. At what point does a microaggression become a major aggression, though? If you're doing it all the time, if you're constantly going on about it, as somebody who has written a book, if I keep on saying that, that becomes a microaggression, a major aggression, doesn't it? A macro aggression.
It sounds like the thesis for another doctorate, really.
Not going through that process again, or is that another microaggression? Because I've mentioned now.
Well, the book that you're always selling. Yeah.
Anyway,
exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so what has actually happened?
What's actually happened to General?
Well, apparently it was a heavy and intense agenda, according to the Church Times. There was stuff about the Macon Review, which was the safeguarding review, which brought Justin Welby down. Victims and survivors of John Smythe were present when a motion was carried expressing repentance. I always find it strange when Synod does things like that, because it's not actually sort of doing anything, is it, apart from saying that we're sorry about this?
But it's a very English sort of sorry, isn't it? It's a bit like when someone gets wet and you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry you got wet." I mean,
does it actually mean anything? So on the Tuesday, the Synod stopped short of transferring all safeguarding functions to an external organisation.
So this is good, although they didn't go stop short enough. It must be said. I'm going to put my, I'm going to be blunt, Jamie. I think that completely outsourcing safeguarding is a dreadful idea.
Yeah, I agree.
And they shouldn't even have gone as far as they have. The independent checking of diocesan safeguarding, okay, fine, some sort of Ofsted, but fundamentally, we cannot and should not abdicate responsibility for safeguarding.
Apparently, no other institution in the UK has ever done this.
Well, why would they? I mean, it's completely antithesis to one of the central precepts of safeguarding anyway, which is that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility.
Yeah, not some kind of external body. Can I read? It reminds me of an email we got this week from Mark, who frequently emails in. So Mark, and he supports us as well. We thank him for doing that. So I'm just going to read his whole email, and you'll see the relevant bit. So, although not a churchgoer, I don't think any self-respecting homosexual need trouble the church. That's his parenthesis. I remain a Christian, and an Orthodox one at that. Thus, I regularly receive notifications about, for example, the latest open letter from the Bishop of Newcastle. My speciality within theology was always Christology, which is why I'm puzzled that the central figure in our faith, Jesus of Nazareth, is so rarely mentioned, if ever, by bishops when they're attempting to make a moral and ethical case. Much of the behaviour which seems to concern them is their obsession with DEI and safeguarding, which is frankly un-Jesus-like. I notice too that the safeguarding issues appear to originate from within the clergy and other seekers after power within the church, and that's a very good observation. They concern the person in the pew, not one jot. As for DEI, Paul's letter to the Galatians deals with that one. If the church needs DEI officers, then the church has failed already. It may as well pack its bags and stop telling others how to live. Can you deal with the lack of Jesus of Nazareth? And then he says, not Christ at this stage, in brackets, he's making a theological point there. In the addresses of the bishops of the C of E, does he embarrass them? But the thing that reminded me there is when he says the thing about DEI officers, if the church needs DEI officers, then it's failed already. I mean, I think if the church needs to outsource its safeguarding to an external body, then the same applies, doesn't it? If we can't provide adequate safeguarding measures, and I don't even like this kind of language, it shouldn't be that. It should just be like caring for and supporting people who are vulnerable in a Christian way.
I just always, I liked, one of the big problems with how the church has approached safeguarding, and it switched a lot of people off, is it didn't take the step of doing some theology about it, right? And it annoys me because, it's quite easy to go from sort of, say, Aquinas and his definition of love to a solid sort of theology of safeguarding that's biblically grounded in love thy neighbor as thyself, and the idea that the only safe churches are modern ones with their modern kind of safeguarding regimes is nonsense. I mean, they have, for one thing, not all churches are safe now, as we know. And the second thing is that, good safeguarding has been practiced in good, proper churches. Wherever there have been good, proper churches, you'd have been safe in Augustine's church, because he's a holy man.
Except when the Goths came.
Well, obviously, but I mean, even my church, I can't guarantee my safeguarding policy has a clause against raving barbarians. So maybe it should.
Turn it into a fortress.
But Do you know what I mean? Do you see
Yeah,
what I
of course.
say?
Yeah, well, it's a Christian thing, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, like safeguarding is a sort of it's a sort of ethical secularization of a Christian concept. So all you need to do is like quote the scriptures. You know, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. You know,
Yeah.
would you molest Christ? No. You know, would you slap Christ and physically abuse him? No, don't do it to children. You know, don't do it to vulnerable people. I mean, it's not very hard to make this kind of case from a Christian perspective. How should you treat elderly people who are vulnerable? You know, like when I go to do a home communion, like how should I treat an elderly person who can't come out of his or her house? You know, I don't need a safeguarding officer to tell me these things because I'm a Christian. You know, it's not like I didn't learn it at theological college either. You know, it's fairly obvious. So anyway, anything else?
So the big thing, they have changed the clergy discipline measure, haven't they?
Yeah, so
there's
the
a new one.
clergy discipline measure has been changed, so it's been modified. So now there are sort of like several different levels that you can be investigated on, which is probably better because it's quite a serious thing now, isn't it? So it's got a 3-tier system for sorting complaints. So people can have, you know, any future complaints about us can be more readily categorized, which will be good, make things clearer. The other thing is issues of trust and power again raised in a debate on proposed changes to the rules followed by the Crown Nominations Committee, which is soon to consider the nomination of the next Archbishop of Canterbury. So
there's good news and there's bad news, isn't there?
Yeah.
So the good news is that they haven't changed the required majority for CNCs. So bishops now, you can't gerrymander the committees. But the bad news is they've done some sort of thing where now we're forced to have equal representation of male and two women, one lay and one ordained on every single board.
Yeah, it says here among the proposals was that at least one woman be chosen to be among the 6 diocesan representatives on the CNC Crown Nomination Committee. Criticism of this prompted an emotional intervention from Bishop Mullally, that's Sarah Mullally, Bishop of London, who said, "Why are we not ensuring that our members are 50% men and 50% women? There continue to be institutional barriers. We women continue to experience microaggression." And that's when she started crying. Okay. Yeah, I fundamentally disagree with this thing about representation. I just have to say I don't agree with this. I think this whole way of thinking about things is completely wrong. The most appropriate people for whatever committee or whatever job it is should have the position. You know, I don't agree with this. That's fundamentally what I'd say to her. Like, why should there not be 50% women? Because it should be the 50%. It should be 100% the right people, and whether or not they're women or men is an irrelevance.
It's supposed to be seeking God's wisdom, isn't it? So it's whoever God sort of puts on the board, really. You know, we're limiting the freedom of the Holy Spirit in a sense.
And if there was an issue that it ended up that such boards were always men or always women, say, or always upper middle class people, I think the issue then is not so much trying to gerrymander it from the top, but to think, well, what's happening at lower levels of process? You know, what's happening in those early discernments that are creating barriers.
Yeah. Barriers can be created everywhere and for all sorts.
But what you want to do is build everybody up so that, you know, as many people as possible are good at discerning. Rather than fix it at the top, which I think really doesn't necessarily do much, as we know from a lot of DEI stuff.
Definitely, yeah.
You end up with pilots that can't fly.
Yeah, exactly right. So there was nothing in Synod about the living in love and faith process. The vote on how prayers and services of blessings for same-sex couples will be to implement, how they're going to be implemented, has been delayed again. A brief discussion of the latest timetable was held on Thursday afternoon with questions from the floor. I mean, General Synod sounds so exciting, doesn't it? I somebody suggested to me this week that I should try and get on it, but I don't know. It sounds too exciting for me. I think it would be too stimulating. The other thing that happened in the Church of England this week, which was interesting, is that somebody was nominated to become the Bishop of Durham, and then that person is withdrawn from the appointment. Now we think we know who it is, but we're not allowed to say because we've got to keep it in confidence. But apparently it's a bit of an open secret. But yeah, so it's kind of, there's an article in the Church Times about it, which doesn't really say anything of any substance apart from that we don't know who the person is and we don't know why they've withdrawn. So
that sounds like a waste of text.
Yeah, well, it's quite a long article,
I mean, I think, the role of bishop is virtually impossible now because, they're just going to dig up something in your past you've done wrong, and then you get, the endless calls to resign start then.
So do you think it could be the case though that like Durham's pretty senior, isn't it? It's like fifth or something like that, fifth most important bishop, fourth or something like that in the Church of England, or most senior, let's say, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible that whoever this is just didn't want to do this job because it would be like, it's already a bishop, this person's already a bishop maybe, or maybe this person has a job doing something else which he or she likes, and they just don't want to be the Bishop of Durham? Because that would be quite surprising, wouldn't it? Because it's such a senior see.
I've heard it said a number of times now by people in various parts of the Anglican ecosphere. The same line comes out. Oh, what's the point? I can do so much more.
Yeah. In
the position I'm in.
That's the way I feel about being the host of a reverend.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. That that to me is telling about what's happened to a position of oversight. Now, a position of oversight, irrespective of all the sort of accoutrements of preferment, it should be, an enjoyable post that allows the bishop to do a whole host of, good and godly and exciting things. It should be a life-giving post. And it sounds like the people who get to the top realize that they're so constrained by the blob.
Yeah.
That I suspect they're constrained by the blob. They are, their in tray is full of safeguarding misdemeanors and complaints. And then a zillion and one policies, endless driving around, that it's somewhat life draining.
Preparing a bishop as well, I think, because you're like preaching everywhere you're going as well, aren't you? Yeah. They probably get.
I'd heard off the record from a friend in senior ministry that when lockdown happened,
right,
a number of bishops crashed and burnt, because it's that classic thing that when you stop is when you feel it.
Yeah, all the adrenaline
and they end up in this sort of cortisol overwhelmed adrenal dysfunction and
flaccid state on the floor in your purple robe.
He said
on the floor of the bathroom, just kind of sprawled out in your purple robe. Mitre all over the place.
A load of these people were just completely burnt out.
Yeah.
And a shell of their former selves. And I think that is beginning to trickle down. Who would want this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you're an ambitious careerist, do you really want this? Because this sounds like a poison chalice more and more than a life-giving job.
Yeah,
I know a couple of bishops who've have gone back to parish ministry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and they're always like same with cathedral deans. They're always much happier after they finish doing their job, aren't they? I was talking to a retired bishop who knows you, Daniel, this week at Pusey House, and it just seems so much more relaxed. I can't imagine they're like that when they're actually doing the job. It must be a nightmare. Anyway, we should finish reasonably soon. Just to say that if people would like to support this show, we really appreciate that. Please go to irreverendpod.com and click on the big red button to become a Patreon today. And if you do that, you will get our fantastic bonus podcast, which is called Uncollared. As I mentioned earlier, we went into a great deal of detail this week about microaggressions and hymns. And we also asked the question, can Rishi Sunak be English? Which is something that was brought up by Tom listeners will be interested to know that was Tom's particular interest to ask that question. So that's what we did on Collared. You can get those podcasts. That we do that every week, mostly. And it only costs £1.50 plus VAT in the UK to become a Patreon of the show. Now, we need the money to run the show. And to be quite frank, I live off this money. I live off the money I make podcasting and writing. So I'm a part-time vicar. So please do support the show. It really makes a huge difference. Or you can buy us a coffee, the yellow button. The other thing I do, or the yellow button on our website, reverendpod.com, which is a virtual coffee, which is just a donation. The other thing we do is we release the episodes early for Patreons, so you get them early as well, which is only a few days early, but you might love this show so much that you just can't wait to get it. So you get the episodes early. So that's another thing we do. Yeah, so that's it. So please support us. If you want to support us in other ways, just send us an email at reverendpod@gmail.com. We can tell you how to do that. Or just send us emails in general, because we really like to get emails at reverendpod@gmail.com. And share the show around, please, with your friends and family, and on social media. Just share it now if you've enjoyed it. Just it'd be really great. Be good, and give us some nice reviews and comments as well, because that releases dopamine in our systems, and it makes us feel happy. So just if you want us to be happy, say nice things. Okay, it's very simple. All right, there we go. Now listen, chaps, I'm going to read a final email. Now I have to say this email is quite complimentary about something I did last week, and if anyone knows who Gilderoy Lockhart is in Harry Potter, this might be kind of Gilderoy Lockhart moment here. I'm not trying to promote myself in reading this email. It's just a nice email. And it relates to something I was talking about somebody grieving last week. And it says nice things about the whole show. Okay, so I hope this doesn't sound too self-aggrandizing. So I'm going to call this person Kay, because I haven't asked whether I can use their name, I don't think. So, dear Reverends, I'm a fan of the show, naturally. More power to your elbows. An observation and a question, if I may. My father died in September, and grief tends to wax and wane, it seems. It can come out of the blue. I felt particularly sad yesterday evening and prayed for my dad and shared my grief with God and asked for guidance. This morning as I ate breakfast, I saw the Irreverend episode links on my phone by chance and decided to listen to the latest Irreverend rather than Uncollared, which came first. In due course, Jamie mentioned C, who was grieving. He then shared great insights and spiritual advice for her, which I felt clearly applied to me also and has been helpful. I believe God answered my prayer through your show by ensuring I listened to Jamie. Thank you. On a more mundane level, I was wondering if there might be any way of securing signed copies of Jamie's new book. I would happily pay extra for one. Thank you all for the show. Your different personalities blend together well, and it's refreshing to have a Christian perspective articulated rather than the incessant woke nonsense one is subjected to more or less everywhere else. May God bless you all. Best wishes, Kay. So there you go. That's a nice email, isn't it? I found that encouraging. So thank you, Kay.
Great one to end on.
Yeah. Sorry about your grief. It sounds...
I think all these emails, Jamie, you should archive, and...
Make a book.
When J. Johns, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, with this huge box of followers and fans, emails, and that are, I think, are really confirmatory of doing something.
Of our mission here.
Yeah. Just in answer to that question, it hasn't even occurred to me to sell signed copies of my book. But if Kay, you want a signed copy, I will sign your copy, and I will not charge you. I'll be very.
Jamie, can I have a signed copy of your book?
Absolutely, you can, Tom. You'd have to buy the book first, of course.
We've got to keep.
I'm not running a charity here.
The standard of living that he has, It's available at the moment, isn't it?
It's available for pre-order. It's being released on March the 13th, and I will of course leave a link to it in the show notes, along with links to my blog, Daniel's blog, and do we put anything else on there? I don't know, our social media and all that stuff. So anyway, you can get all those links, and to our website, reverendpod.com. Great. Does someone want to do a prayer to finish?
Okay. So, Heavenly Father, we offer up all the things we've talked about. We give thanks for the emails we've been given and all the impact we're having on people's lives, and pray that we are used by you, Lord, to bring your kingdom into this world and to help people find you. We pray for the Bishop of London, and for all who feel microaggressed, that they may have peace, and that they may, be filled with godly wisdom. We pray for General Synod for the same, for godly wisdom. Finally, we pray for a change of heart in our Parliament about the amendment to the suicide bill, and that this gets rejected by the third reading, because may your will be done, Lord, and not Kim Ledbetter's, and not the wills of this world, but your will. Amen.
Amen.
Very good. All right. Well done, everyone. Thank you very much. Until next time, keep watch.
Keep the faith.